So hello everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. It's not a people problem, it's the process. I'm Rachel Pradhan, Director of Business Development here at the Ativo Group. And the graphic here is of an ebook that I'll be sending over after the call today. So be sure to be looking in your inbox for that. So let's get started. In our experience with working with businesses, we often see owners and C-levels yelling at managers, and then managers yelling at employees to work faster, improve productivity, cut costs, and improve profits. And perhaps you see it in your own business with customers falling through the cracks and constant errors in the data. Maybe your business feels like a revolving door of employees that has potential, but never seem to be able to live up to the expectations. Too often the term lean initiatives gets confused with layoffs and labor cost reduction. Companies can get too caught up in looking for ways to cut costs rather than ways to run a more efficient and improve productivity. Our speaker today will often say, if your balance sheet isn't something that you want to frame and put on the wall, most likely it's not because you have a people problem. You have a process problem. And the good news is that it's a lot easier to fix. So long as you're willing to dig within your own organization and find out what isn't working and are open to the changes necessary to fix things. And that's what we'll be discussing today. But first, let me introduce our speaker. Len Rio. He's our president and general manager here at the Ativo Group and founder of our company in 1992. Before that, he had a significant career in cost accounting and financial management with several manufacturing and distribution companies. And during this period, he found his passion in developing and improving business processes, just what we're talking about today, and as well as the information systems that support them. As one of the foremost experts in Exact Macola software, among other ERP systems, Len has built Ativo into a national operation with clients spanning the entire United States. So Len, what are we going to be talking about today?
Well, first of all, regardless of what subsector of the manufacturing or distribution industry you work in, there's a few constants that apply across the board. And having worked in both industries for over 30 years, I've been exposed to most all of them, and they stand the test of time. The first is that even as technology has advanced, making automation more prevalent, whenever an issue arises, it seems like the C-level employees always look to the workforce first as the culprit. And while technology can be responsible for improved margins and profits, it can also be a blindfold to individuals trying to properly diagnose a problem. The second constant, as Rachel said, is that most of the time you don't have a people problem. What you really have is a process problem. The third constant is that people who perform daily duties over and over again are rarely thinking about how something could be done more efficiently. They keep their head down and plow through a stack of something, and when they get done with the stack, they feel like they accomplished something and worked really hard. The manager sees them working hard, and assuming everything is okay, he turns to something, or she turns to something more pressing in their day. That's just human nature. But when you add up all of the wasted time inside those seemingly necessary processes, you have the effect of 1,000 leaking faucets, essentially wasted payroll. The last constant is also about human nature. Employees want to do their job correctly so they won't get in trouble with the boss man. They want to keep their jobs, and the last thing they want to see is the boss walking towards them with an angry look on his face. And a poorly defined process introduces way too much uncertainty in that person's job and way too much decision making, and it's typically the main reason for high turnover. So today we'll be going over the why, the what, the who, and the how of a business process assessment, as well as the costs involved. If you have a question, please be sure to use the question. There's a chat feature within the WebEx thing if you want to just jot down any questions that come up, but we'll also be opening up the phone lines at the end just in case there are other questions as well. So let's get to the why. The best way to explain why we should do this is to kind of look at a couple of examples. So here's one example of a company which, as part of its market strategy and industry norms, they accept returns from their customers. The company, we'll call them Returns Are Us, and they're in the consumer goods distribution business, selling to retail outlets. What you're seeing is a picture of part of their warehouse where they've actually been able to collect together returned items and get them ready for, unloading to someone who takes them to a swap meet or something. There's probably much more than that waiting to be sorted through and pulled together. And I've seen this a number of times. It just makes me shake my head that so much material is returned in our country. It's just a norm. The big problem with this company is they don't have a very clear returns process in place. So this is very common too. They have return authorization numbers that they give out from an Excel spreadsheet, which isn't matched up to anything in a system in terms of a prior sale or an invoice. And then the accounting department uses the worksheet to issue credits in the best way they can with the limited information that they have. Customers that send in returns aren't very happy because they're not getting their credits in a timely manner, and so they call and yell at the customer service reps who have little to work with when the customer is yelling at them, and thus they have a very high turnover rate in customer service. Believe it or not, it's more common than you might think. Many customers also take advantage of their loose returns policy and return all kinds of products for any reason whatsoever, some of which are not theirs, costing the company money, basically for unloading it and handling it and everything else that they might need to do. Now, if a company was in this rut, it would be really hard for management to see a way out because they've been dealing with it in the same way for years, and the problem has just grown worse with the passage of time. You can imagine that the company's reputation for customer service has subsequently declined, and C-level managers are quick to point the finger at the people in customer service. What the C-level managers really need to do is get their returns act together and fix the process. Here's another example. It's a little different than the last one, but this is Frank. He's the owner and founder of Acme Foods Manufacturing. He started out with one truck and a small warehouse in his food processing plant, and it's been 5 years since then, and he now employs 50 people with revenues quickly approaching $25 million. Since he was there in the beginning, vendors, employees, managers, and customers have all expected to be able to reach him and get answers and help. And since the company has grown, he hasn't been able to keep up and needs to figure out processes so he can delegate his overflowing plate. So desperate to turn things around, Acme turned to a business process consultant to analyze their current operations and to help them uncover the reasons why profits had dipped and stagnated despite an increase in revenues. They know that they have the right people in place to be profitable. The manufacturing equipment is top of the line, and the product is a great product. On the surface, things seem to be going just fine. Revenues are up, new business opportunities are expanding, existing business-to-business distribution chains are holding steady. There's no obvious reason why profits should be shrinking, especially considering the success of their new e-commerce site. They have all of the infrastructure needed in place to be extremely successful, but they're headed in the opposite direction. In these instances, the issues that lead to decreased profits are never surface-level problems. Data and information management has just as much of an impact on the bottom line as actual physical production issues and sales do. Companies need to dig deeper and analyze their business processes to determine where waste is occurring and where opportunity is being lost. So while Acme is a fictional company, this case study runs parallel to several actual company success stories that we have worked with here at Ativo. By combining several common issues that we have come across over the years into one case study, it will allow us to provide continuity throughout the book. It is also very important to realize that most of the companies that we work with are doing just fine. A company doesn't have to be hemorrhaging money in order to find inefficiencies within their business processes that could ultimately lead to greater profits if they were fixed. And companies who are doing just fine today may find themselves struggling to keep their heads above water in the future if they aren't constantly self-evaluating in search of new technologies and processes that can maximize efficiency and maximize the bottom line. So, who should be doing a business process assessment? Who actually needs this? Well, I have to give you another visual. Think of a company's business processes as a lawn sprinkler system, and the purpose of that sprinkler system is to water your lawn and keep it green and healthy. So similarly, a company's business processes are meant to manufacture or distribute a product at a profit. So long as the grass is green or profit is being made, it's assumed that the system is working. Unfortunately, a sprinkler system can achieve the end goal without operating at maximum efficiency. Overwatering or just one broken sprinkler head can cause a water bill to skyrocket out of control. In my neighborhood in Southern California, where water is expensive and fines are levied for watering on the wrong day of the week, yeah, they do that, I still see plenty of water flowing down the streets and down the storm drain when I'm out walking the dog in the morning. And nobody's watching for this. Your profits can go right down the drain in the same way, profits that could have been in your bonus check instead. The same could be said about a company's business systems. If even one process isn't as efficient as it could be, it's costing you money. Over the past 2 decades, I've worked with hundreds of manufacturers and distributors, and without exception, there's money being left on the table due to inefficiencies. Some are better off than others at minimizing loss, but I can't think of a single person that wouldn't want a little more black ink in the general ledger at the end of the day. Building a scalable business is rarely as simple as throwing more man-hours at growth and expansion. It's almost never about the operator of a given system or process. And just because you're adding new clients or customers and orders are up does not mean that profits follow suit. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to add more bodies in the office, on the shop floor, or the warehouse to cope with it either. Growth tends to expose inefficiencies in the same way that pressure can cause a small leak in a pipe to eventually burst. Growth also hides a lot of sins. But most companies wait until a pipe bursts and the basement is flooded before paying attention to the underlying issue. Why is that? It just makes me shake my head. Just because the old ways work for your current business volume does not mean that they will work when demand forces expansion. This is especially true of small to mid-market manufacturers and distributors. It's really important to realize it is very difficult to internally analyze your own system. Identifying areas that can afford to have a little fat trimmed is difficult enough. Coming up with the solutions necessary and then correctly implementing them is another thing altogether. So who needs a business process assessment? Well, any company or organization considering an upgrade or replacement of their ERP system is a prime candidate. In any company that has business processes that might need improving, which is pretty much everybody, needs a business process assessment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what a business process assessment is all about. So even the biggest companies hire consultants all the time. That's because it often requires a new set of eyes to approach problems from a fresh perspective. A business process assessment is simply an opportunity to increase your efficiency, allowing your employees to handle more business with less redundancy, less waste, and without being overwhelmed or overworked. There are several ways that a company can go about the process, but typically it is best to let an outside set of eyes help uncover the missed opportunities and areas for improvement. And while the purpose of this presentation isn't to go over a step-by-step walkthrough of a business process assessment, it is important to understand the general principles behind it. First of all, it is important to look at each process or system individually, but understand how each impacts and interacts with one another. For example, an e-commerce website and an inventory tracking system each have their own set of potential problems and inefficiencies, and those need to be worked out individually. But at the same time, they need to be able to integrate with one another so that you can maintain maximum efficiency. For example, you might be presenting availability on your e-commerce website. But what is a business process assessment anyway? Well, it's how you identify what's holding you back and excelling at business. Athletes must continually practice and work on weaknesses. Singers, actors, comedians, they all must practice and be coached for improvement. Why should we accept mediocre business performance? Doesn't that impact profits? A little more on kind of the background to this. Ativo didn't dream this up. This goes back to, well, actually, it began as a cultural change in business, first in Japan, right after World War II. And the word Kaizen is a Japanese term which means continuous improvement, essentially. In his book, Out of the Crisis, Dr. Deming, who is kind of the father of quality, shared his philosophy of continuous improvement, or good change. Kaizen embraces the following concepts. Number one, create constancy of purpose toward improvement of product and service with the aim to become competitive and to stay in business and to provide jobs. Pretty straightforward. Everyone must adopt the new philosophy. We must work to eliminate the need for inspection on a mass basis by building quality into the products all along the way in the first place. We need to end the practice of awarding business on the basis of price tag. Instead, work towards minimizing total cost. We must improve constantly and forever the system of production and service to improve quality and productivity and thus constantly decrease costs. We need to institute training on the job. We need to institute leadership. The aim of supervision should be to help people and machines and gadgets to do a better job. We also need to drive out fear so that everyone may work effectively for the company. Fear of opening their mouth, fear of saying, hey, I think I know a better way to go. All of those kinds of fears need to be out of our vocabulary. We need to break down barriers between departments. People in research, design, sales, and production must work as a team to foresee problems of production. We need to eliminate asking for zero defects and new levels of productivity. Such exhortations only create adversarial relationships, as the bulk of the causes of low quality and low productivity belong to the system and thus lie beyond the power of the workforce. That's really important to understand. We need to remove the barriers that rob the hourly worker of his right to the pride of workmanship. And similarly, management and engineering, they need to have the right to pride of workmanship. Institute a vigorous program of education and self-improvement. Put everybody in the company to work to accomplish the transformation. The transformation is everybody's job. So just to be clear, when we talk about doing a business process assessment, we're not talking about a one and done process. It's a living document, lives online, allowing businesses to use the document for years to come to constantly reflect and grow. In fact, well, I was at a conference earlier this year, a company that had completed a BPA about 15 years ago. They would still bring it out annually to review processes and and improvement initiatives, and then set their initiatives for the upcoming year. That's what we're talking about in terms of living the Kaizen philosophy. So some of the, if I can give you a visual of what this, how this originated, it started out about, I don't know, 18, 20 years ago as a great big Excel workbook. And it had a worksheet in it for every functional area in the business. You know, one for purchasing, one for order entry, one for quoting, and one for human resources, name it. And then on each one of those worksheets was 20 questions or more. How do you do your product pricing? How do you pay commissions? What about warranties? Do you have products that have warranties? How do you track those? And so forth. And it would just run through an entire battery of questions, most of which apply to most companies, some of which didn't apply if they weren't manufacturers or something like that. But that's how it started out. It's now an online document, and it covers pretty much the front door to the back door of a company. So manufacturing, inventory, warehouse management, barcode data collection, project management, sales, customer service, fulfillment, shipping, you get the idea. A heavy focus is on interactions with the customer because that should be everyone's main job, so we want to make sure that we're focused on those kinds of things. And this is kind of an example of one taken from the accounts payable section, one taken from general ledger. So, you know, what is the description of the process? And what we look for in doing this is, I'm going to explain how this is all done, is we're looking for processes that have issues. And basically, what are the opportunities to improve those processes? Then, as you can see, as you read across, we identify the priority of that particular process improvement. Is this important? Is it urgent? Is it nice to have, or is it okay as is? And if we do have an opportunity, what kind of opportunity is it? Is it one where we can reduce costs? Is it one where we can increase revenues? Or is it something related to compliance that needs to keep us out of trouble with the government, with the customer, with whatever it is that is important for compliance for that particular company? We may identify phases, and then tasks that are needed in order to support the process improvement opportunity, and perhaps some kind of project scope implication. Keep in mind that there's going to be well over 600 questions to be asked, and some of which won't apply, but imagine that there's 500 that do apply. There could be 250 to 300 process improvement opportunities. We're going to need to pick our battles. So priorities, cost to revenue impacts, those kinds of things are going to be important to help us sort through a plan or a roadmap for process improvement. So who should be involved in this process improvement exercise? Well, no matter how involved the CEO or a president may be in their company, it's unrealistic to expect them to be completely abreast of every situation that's going on within their company. It's not reasonable to expect them to be aware of a running toilet in the bathroom or a crack in the ceiling. It's also unrealistic for them to be fully aware of the day-to-day activities of their customer service team, their warehouse management team, or their accounting systems. So before you could consider solutions, you need to fully understand the as-is process. And there is nobody within a company who understands the current systems better than the people who are enacting those transactions on a day-to-day basis. Regardless of the size of the company, I've never one time encountered a situation where the owner, president, CEO has had their finger on the pulse of every single business process within their organization. That's completely okay. That's one of the reasons why it's vital to involve key employees in each department who actually do the jobs or are responsible for them and get their inputs. These employees are the front line of information, and then they have the best grasp of what is going on with each individual process. There's also a critical element of the change management process that we need to talk about. You must solicit advice from them and involve those individuals that will be responsible for actually implementing the changes, or change will be very difficult. So the best way to allow the employees to embrace the change that you have in mind is to make it their idea in the first place. So both key employees and C-level managers need to be involved in the BPA process. And the reason for that is that the BPA addresses both the day-to-day operations as well as the bigger picture solutions, because we also want to consider how the business might be changing and how we might be required to support those processes as the company continues to grow. So now that we have the C-level people, the key process owners, all of those folks in line, what's the process like? So first we have, the key personnel in the company provide their inputs first. So essentially we introduce the worksheet. It's a very simple worksheet to use. There's very little training involved. Anyone who can, fill out a spreadsheet can work with this online tool. It's very much grid-like in that manner. What we're looking for is essentially 3 pieces of information at this time. It is the description of the processes. In other words, how do you do the pricing? So we want all the gory details of how it's happening now. Any issues that they recognize with that process as a result of doing it in that way. And thirdly, what's on their mind in terms of process improvements? Chances are they've either worked elsewhere where a best practice was followed, or they have good common sense, but the kind of inputs that we see vary significantly. In some cases, the person who owns and is the key person in a functional area happens to have worked there since they were 16, and they don't know what a best practice looks like. They just know how to do it the way they were told and shown the first time. That's okay. We want input from everyone, because in the next step, it's time for the on-site interviews. So the business process assessment consultant, someone who looks like me, will then review all the inputs, which is conducted then as in-person interviews. So we'll sit down with those C-level people as well as the key personnel that have been selected to provide the inputs, ask them to clarify the process if it isn't clear, essentially peeling the onion a little further with them, review the issues they're facing, and then basically see if those key people have improvement recommendations and what they feel the prioritization of those issues are. But what we're looking for in those interviews is recommendations for process improvement that are best practices for that particular function. When we aren't hearing those types of recommendations coming from the person who provided the input to fix an inefficient process, we can then bring our experience with similar companies and explore with that key process owner how a best practice could be implemented for them. In this way, they also have a big part in owning the process improvement recommendation itself. So it's never the consultant saying, well, you should do it this way. It's the consultant essentially leading the person providing the inputs to a place where they can articulate with their own words how that process should be improved to emulate a best practice. It's a very important aspect of change management. Then once all of the interviews and input is completed, then the consultant will review the findings and recommendations with the project lead That could be a C-level manager, it could be a project manager, it could be, someone that has been delegated to kind of bring it all together and then present it to management. And that presentation needs to include the participants, because each of those participants are going to be given credit for the recommendations that have been made. And this, again, solidifies their commitment to the process and facilitates the change management. So during any BPA, a consultant is going to find a lot of issues, some less important than others. And the great thing about a BPA is that it's a living document, right? And all improvements don't have to be implemented at the same time. They can be tackled in order of importance and priority based on a number of factors. If it's compliance and it's a big risk for the company, it might be very, very important that it's handled right away. Or it might be something that is kind of low-hanging fruit, and we can knock it out really quickly and fix one of those leaking faucets. So together with the consultant, you'll understand what's urgent to fix now, prioritize it in a way that it can be accomplished in a reasonable period of time, that a number of the initiatives can be accomplished in a reasonable period of time, and then others can be accomplished in phases. So if systems are needed to improve and support the processes, proposals for implementation are created and a rollout plan that supports the different phases of the business process improvements is put together. If the consultant needs to continue to do some of that is what I'm referring to. It's really important that top management is behind all of this before any changes can really be embraced by the employees. So resources need to be committed to the changes, and there also needs to be an understanding that there's no going back. So, soliciting that participation and input from the system stakeholders, that's an important, I keep saying that over and over again, an important first step in that change management. It's critical to the project, and strategies for managing the change need to be included for each initiative. So the right software that has the tools to support the needs of the business is critical. It may be time for an upgrade to your existing system or a completely new system. The business process assessment will uncover those critical business processes that need to be addressed. And this is an excellent time to determine if your existing system is capable of supporting those processes. So Ativo is a reseller of software, and quite often we're brought into a software selection initiative, and no one can really articulate the most important processes that need to be supported by their new system. That's quite often one of the times that we actually perform a business process assessment, and in some cases, they choose software that we happen to work with. In other cases, they choose software that isn't one that we work with, and that's perfectly fine. But the key is that understanding what is critical to the business when a new system has to be selected is important. Otherwise, what we hear is we hear the squeaky wheel, the person with the loudest mouth, in other words, and the person who is really, underserved, maybe it's the quality manager, doesn't really get a fair shake because we never considered the importance of the quality management department. Another aspect of system implementations, let's say that you were in a situation where you have the right software. We need to remember that implementation of ERP software is not a perfect science. And tailoring or enhancing your ERP software is pretty typical, and it happens in phases. So it may be time to undertake further implementation and build on what is already a strong foundation. Or it may be time to start with a new system. So that's something to consider about how a BPA might be of use for your company. The cost of an assessment should be on your mind by now. And basically, you might be asking yourself, is this something we can pull off, or did I just waste my time on this webinar? Well, it is not an all-or-nothing project necessarily. It can be more focused. It can be broken into pieces in general areas such as, say, customer service. So we deal with just sales and quoting and customer service, maybe a little bit of inventory management. Or it could be something that's focused on the manufacturing side, or it could be in the finance area, or administration. If it is broken into pieces like that, the strategy must consider the upstream and the downstream implications, kind of like my e-commerce and inventory example. Now, Ativo is not the only company that can provide a business process assessment. There are many companies who do this kind of thing. Many other companies, such as Exact Software, one of the software developers that we work with, they charge anywhere between $25,000 and $75,000. But we understand, having worked with many small and medium-sized businesses, that a business process assessment is only the beginning of the improvement process. And we would like to work with you to see you through the improvement phase. And that's generally because, well, we have firsthand knowledge now of your company, and it makes it very easy for us to work with you on that basis. So we developed this process, our process, to be as affordable as possible. We charge anywhere between $5,000 and $10,000, depending on the number of locations that you might have and the number of persons we need to interview. It would be even less if it was broken into phases. And by automating the process with our online tool, we have gained considerable efficiencies. And yes, we do actually continually improve the online tool because that's part of continuous improvement. As I mentioned, the initial input is done by your personnel, which saves consulting time. There's something else that happens when that goes on too. Your personnel, which it's usually about a period of 2 weeks elapsed time that we allow for all of the folks to be providing their input, it allows them to think about it and maybe update their answers and their inputs multiple times during that 2-week period. But when we sit down and interview with them, it isn't like, hey, I want you to start thinking about this. They've already been thinking about it. And so we're getting a much better result because of the no-pressure inputs that we're asking for from them. So we're focused on completing the assessment during this process and not, I repeat, not doing a complete business process re-engineering at the same time. Quite often, when we review a process that's broken, we might actually realize that, you know what, we need to take this offline, so to speak. This is going to take a whole separate day with multiple people to map out a better process and then do a pilot of it to make sure that it's going to work and everything else that might be involved in a complex process. But at least in this assessment, we identified that the process is broken. These are the issues. Here's a process improvement recommendation, but somebody's got to swing into motion and do some work now to make that all happen. I apologize if there's background noise. It seems like there's construction going on in the suite next to us. So for a company like, let's go back to like Acme Food Manufacturing with 75 employees, one location, and revenues of $25 million, the cost would be like $6,000, plus any reimbursed travel costs if there are any. And keep in mind that that would cover 2 days of on-site interviews plus preparation of the summary of findings and recommendations. There are profit improvement opportunities in every company. That's not an indictment, but that's the reality. And think of it like this. If you'd ever put on a winter coat for the first time of the year and then you reached into the pocket only to find a crisp $20 bill, then you'll understand what a business process assessment is all about. It's found money. You didn't have to do anything revolutionary to find that $20. It was there all spring and summer just waiting to be found. There's money on your shop floor, in your customer service department, in your accounting department, in the warehouse and in your distribution system just waiting to be found. It's the companies that are willing to look for it that are driving their balance sheets and bottom line through any type of economy. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. And basically, after this phone call, as I mentioned, you will be receiving a copy of the ebook. It's not a people problem. So be on the lookout for that.
Do you want me to open up the lines and see if anyone would like to?
Yeah, please do. Okay, we did have one question that came in over chat.
Do you want to go over that first before I open
the question had to do with, we're not re-engineering processes, so what about items that are quick and easy? Well, the answer to that is, you know, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, and quite often, you know, we are, first of all, being experts with the software that we're typically reviewing a company for, we can point out the kinds of reports or processes or whatnot that the person providing the input didn't even know about. So it's definitely, there definitely is a lot of low-hanging fruit that gets handled in those 2 days of on-site interviews. So yeah, that was a great question. I mean, that itself is typically, you know, pays for the price of the thing just to have those things handled right within the whole assessment process.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. So if you have a question,